Good day. My name is Tom Mallory, and as you probably know, I am the city's staff writer. It's my job to help the city's smart subject matter experts, folks like you, more effectively and more clearly tell the city's story. I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy workdays to talk about how we can make the city's writing more effective. So I've been coaching people in their writing for a long time. I was a news editor in my former life. I love doing this. I love coaching staff to write more clearly. And this is important for you guys and in less time, if possible. That's a big part of my job, to make it more efficient. To help us get through this, I'm going to be using a term I either coined or picked up along the way: speed bumps. Now, I'm not casting any shade on our friends in transportation or the humps our friends in traffic have out around the city to help keep us safe. I'm going to explain what I mean by speed bumps in just a bit. But first, as promised, I want to touch on what I think is the biggest impediment to smart people writing well: their own expertise. You guys know the stuff too well. This comes up in the teachings of Steven Pinker, a scholar and linguist who's so smart he can actually rock that hairdo 24/7. The idea is that we know an idea so well, it's so familiar to us, that we don't recognize that others don't share that knowledge. So remember, just because you know something, that is as obvious as the day to you, that does not mean the reader will know it. So why does clear writing matter? Why is this important? Well, our writing explains city operations, policies, processes. If we don't write clearly, the public can't have a clear sense of how we're running the city of Carlsbad, and they're the ones who pay the bills here. Think about your own lives. You're busy. Time is short. No one wants to have to work hard to understand something. It doesn't have to be C-spot run, but it also doesn't have to be quantum mechanics. It does need to be accessible to people who may very well be brand new to the subject matter. We don't want to be misunderstood, of course. But why does the style stuff, the uppercase, the lowercase rules, why does that matter? That's because that sends a message of quality, of professionalism, and because our community members expect it. Along those lines, it builds trust. You don't want a reader to say, if they got that wrong, who knows what else they messed up. This part is perhaps the most important lesson here, the foundation of it all. Imagine a person or a couple people, your spouse or a friend, if they aren't both also engineers or planners or rocket scientists. I think of an imaginary Mrs. Ruiz who lives on Roosevelt Street and the council members, and then write for that audience. You are telling them a story. What will they need? Where in the narrative will they need it? What details can you spare them? They have busy lives too. And what concepts might they need help with? If you see the document from their perspective, you will create something that will be easier for them to grasp. So I wanted to provide some examples in this talk of failed government communication attempts, but I also didn't want to make anybody feel I was picking on them, and words aren't as fast as images, so bear with me a bit here. Here are some fairly epic failures in government communication. Obviously, these are flippant examples, but I wanted to share them because each of these strange or baffling signs probably seem perfectly clear and straightforward to the person who designed them and posted them. Except, however, for that last one, which looks like the work of a vengeful city employee just about to retire. Sometimes unclear communication sends an unintended message. I had to break the rules of this tennis court and leave, even though no one else had showed up. What they meant to say was, you can keep playing if no one else shows up. Go ahead, it's fine. But the way they wrote it sounds more like, you shall play tennis forever unless someone else arrives. We all know what high occupancy vehicle and carpools mean. But if you think about it, those are both odd terms. And here you can see the state of California felt the need to define them with even more words. Two people in a car isn't really high occupancy, a phrase that could mean something very different in a state with laws like those in California, right? And a carpool refers to a specific social contract. I drive you today, you drive me tomorrow. A simpler solution would be 2+. The idea is to convey the information as quickly and effectively as possible. Tell me, but don't make me think. And don't make me read more words than I have to when I'm driving down the freeway, please. Let's go back to speed bumps again, and again with all due respect to our colleagues in transportation. What is this speed bump? Okay, this is how you want your document to read. Like a nice, easy-to-drive road. There'll be some twists and turns, but you don't want it to be too windy. If there's a turn coming up, it's not a sudden surprise. And maybe if there's a pretty view if possible. But at least you can see where you're going. This is the speed bump. It slows you down, hinders your passage, makes you think about what you're doing, and in this extreme case, keeps you from seeing the road ahead. Speed bumps can be great in traffic engineering, but you do not want them on your information highway. Speed bump, anything that slows the reader down on her path through your report, your email, your narrative, your story. Jargon, the jargon you guys need to do your job every single day, can be huge speed bumps. These are all terms I came across in staff reports that seem crystal clear to the authors, they use them all the time, and to the other subject matter experts who reviewed the documents, but would be unclear to most lay readers. Incidental take is probably my favorite one. It's the term for habitat that has been lawfully developed that is natural land that's legally paved over. No one would know what that means. Punctuation can be speed bumps. Periods and commas are invisible, like the words of or said. You don't even notice them. But unexpected or unneeded punctuation can force a reader to pause and even puzzle. I'll touch on each of these punctuation marks later in this talk and on the trouble they can cause. Non-conversational phrasing. If you overheard these two people having this conversation, you would wonder what planet they were from or if they were robots. So what is it so off-putting and indeed weird about what they're saying? Well, first off, the tense is all passive. Not just I went to the store. There's no active voice in it. The word choices are odd. Who has a telephonic conversation pertaining to something? It also includes a bunch of unnecessary concepts and odd specifics. People don't need to be told what kind of things you buy at the grocery store. They know. You don't have to say immediate household food and beverage needs, and they know where you keep the food at home or they don't care. Also, do you think the other person cares if it was Vaughn's, not Ralph's? It's just oddly tacked on there at the end. This sounds silly, but I have documents that have been written by really smart subject matter experts that sound kind of like this. The passive tense makes it hard to tell who does something. Words are oddly chosen and non-conversational, and there's a lot of extra information in it that's actually deterring the reader from understanding it. And this is worth noting. When those same smart people presented their reports orally, it was fine. Much easier to follow, much easier to understand, and that's because they were talking to somebody. Now for the truly pedantic part, the rules of the road, our style guidelines, which come from AP Style. Also note, this slide's an example of having too many rules. Who could possibly remember all these strange random things from skiing to eating ice cream that are banned at this intersection? Use the active voice because it conveys a strong, clear tone. The passive voice is subtler and weaker. The passive tense can state in action, this thing happened, but not say who did the action. Here's what I'm talking about. I had a train buddy who was a medical investigator for the state. He would routinely get documents from the hospital that said the patient was intubated or the sutures were removed, and constantly had to ask, okay, but who did it? Here's some advice. Do not use the passive voice just because you think it sounds a bit fancier. That said, there are times when the passive voice is useful and called for. For example, the squirrel was chased by a dog. That sentence construction would be useful if you're talking about the squirrel. The squirrel is the focus of your writing and not the dog. But a good rule of thumb is to put most of the sentences in the active voice unless you can't write the sentence another way or there's a reason to do so. Another question to ask yourself as you're writing, would everyone understand every term you're using? Do you even need to use that term if there's an easier or faster way to say it? Example, if I told you a story about how I built a chicken coop, would you want to know what kind of hammer I used? C, hammer, claw. There are words of government and law that when you're in the business you don't notice, but they can actually be off-putting for the lay reader, or that require for them extra work that isn't needed. In accordance with is a little longer, but I think it's kind of clearer than pursuant or per if you're outside of the government. There are times when words like address or mitigate are really helpful. The idea with those words is we're going to figure out what's wrong with whatever it is and do whatever it takes to make it better. But if you can say the thing is broken and you're going to fix it, that makes a much clearer and more specific picture of the work to be done than address and mitigate. Also, about, before, and after. Those are perfectly fine words. And just because they may not sound fancy, they're faster, clearer, more straightforward, easier to understand than a lot of the synonyms people use for those. Capitalization. This slide kind of speaks for itself. I will concede that writing contracts, working in government and the law can erode the lessons about proper noun capitalization that we all learned in grammar school. A tip, here's a good tip, Make words have to argue their way into being capitalized. You, why should you be capitalized? You're not a proper noun, you word you. What am I talking about? Things that aren't capitalized. Only proper nouns are capitalized, not concepts, not types of documents, not project, not processes, tools, practices, or countless other things that, I'm sorry, get randomly capitalized in governmental and legal documents. This comes up so often in my work that I actually have a little cheat key set up to put words in lowercase. We have some exceptions to AP style here in Carlsbad. The word city is uppercase when it goes before of Carlsbad, with the same rule applying to other cities, city of Encinitas. While technically, you would only capitalize community development when it's the full name, the Community Development Department, we capitalize department names for clarity and for emphasis. Parks and Recreation, for example. We also capitalize job titles when they're the actual title, the city manager, which is a recent change. Plurals can be tricky when capitalization comes in. You're used to capitalizing a word, you make it plural, it goes lowercase then, it's not a proper noun anymore. The aggregate, the plural, the group is not capitalized. So the US Constitution would be uppercase, but those nations' constitutions would not be. Also, this is hard because it's the way we talk, but it's really the city council, not just city council, in that this was presented to the city council in a report, not to council. I come across this a lot, and it's easy to miss, particularly in a long sentence with a lot of parts. So if you start off with each community member, you need to stay in the singular tense for the rest of that sentence. If you have community members, you also need to make sure the verbs and noun that immediately follow are also plural. Also, singular nouns can raise gender problems. Is a community member a he or a she? But increasingly it's found okay in American usage to say them or they instead, and even I'm starting to get used to that. People don't really notice it. Okay, you just got off the phone with the nice folks at the State Housing Community Development Department. Don't let their niceness or humanity fool you. A department is an it. The company said it. The city council said it. So when you want to have people talking about it, you're going to put people into it. Have the people do the action. City council members, for example. This is a hard thing for government people who are used to communicating in acronyms to avoid. I made up an acronym to drive my point home, achoo, I'm not sneezing. You guys probably need to rely on acronyms to do your jobs. They can contain a mouthful, but if you're not familiar with them, they are hugely off-putting, even baffling. Even if you define an acronym up at the top of the document, the reader may forget and need to stop reading, go back up to find out that definition, and then find where she was in the document to get reoriented, what the document was saying. Usually, just repeating the title of something, even if it's a little bit long, it's more typing, but it's easier on the reader than the acronym. General Plan Update is more readily comprehended than GPU, unless you deal with the GPU, all the LLD. LLD stands for Live Long Day. This is what the AP style book and the city's own style guide say about acronyms. Basically, they urge us not to use them beyond FBI, CIA, FDA, the ones that are regularly recognized. In San Diego County, I would concede San Diego, NCTD, our own CMWD. People know what those mean, but when you get into some of the more discipline-focused acronyms, it's better to avoid them. This might surprise you if you're used to government writing. A slash does not mean and. It means either or. I think this is a bit of shorthand that made its way into governmental writing. I kind of see it a lot. A slash is super helpful when you want to say either this thing or that thing, but it's not a good way to say these two words mean the same thing, but I just couldn't choose between them. Please just pick the best one. Semicolons are hard, and actually some of you are better at using semicolons than I am, I will admit. They aren't used in news writing much, and they're used in contract language a lot. Where they are really helpful is in creating a sharp edge between one thought and an elaboration upon that thought, or between one thing and then a contradiction, as in this example. But I admit, I often replace semicolons with a little invisible word, like but, or make it two sentences, if that would be faster and easier to read and to comprehend. Parentheses are huge speed bumps. They're even shaped like speed bumps. And sometimes they make you have to pause and think to figure out just what that thing in the parentheses relates to. It's usually better to work the parenthetical insertion into the sentence. An exception might be, say, a list of actions that are followed by the costs, where it's really obvious what it is, and it's consistently used among a group of items. If you do need to add a clarifying fact or an insertion that just doesn't fit, em dashes or long dashes are a lot less bumpy than parentheses and can work that fact into your narrative better. Now we're at a hard and fast style rule. I'm sorry, but you just need to remember to look up these things. I've internalized the basic rules after many years. It's kind of automatic, but I will concede I still have had to look up the style book entries for dates and numerals about 2 million times. Some examples here of how the usage affects the style. In the interactive version of this presentation, there'd be a quiz on all this later. Well, here we will trust you to commit all of this to memory. Thank you. Let lists be lists, free them to be lists. If you have a bunch of things in a sentence separated by columns, or especially commas and semicolons, you have a list. Free the lists. A reader can easily skim over a list in a sentence and miss stuff, yet see it more clearly when the items are broken out. They can more easily compare the individual items, but also see them as a whole. There are the three things, 1, 2, 3. Super clear. Now we're going to get into a little controversy here. My own grown son, who I love and respect very much, actually likes to use the Oxford or serial comma. This is that unneeded punctuation mark that appears before and in a list. I think it's not needed, and the AP Style book agrees, because it's usually obvious that those are different things, spaghetti and steak. However, the Oxford comma is needed sometimes to avoid confusion, and in at least one case, a lawsuit. The state of Maine actually lost a lawsuit over labor and wages because of the lack of an Oxford comma. The disagreement stemmed from the fact that there's no Oxford comma in the packing for shipment or distribution part. In this case, drivers for dairy argued that because of a lack of a comma between packing for shipment and or distribution, the law refers to the single action of packing. In this case, drivers for dairy argued that due to a lack of a comma between packing for shipment and or distribution, the law refers to the single activity of packing, not the packing and distribution as two separate actions. As the drivers distribute but do not pack, this made them eligible for overtime pay. You could also fix this by just adding a or for the before the distribution of goods, or again, by making this into a bulleted list. The list would have been bulletproof. People use more words than they need. If there are 5 addresses, you generally don't have to say they're different addresses. Readers will pick up concepts like furthermore or in addition to just because you put something next, and they'll get that the last part is the conclusion. I am out of the office means exactly the same thing as I am currently out of the office, unless you want to reassure people that yes, someday you will return. To date is handy if you want to indicate a number or a situation might have changed since when you wrote it, but otherwise that is generally implied. This has not come up in my city work a lot, but I have seen however and but misused often. You only want to do that when you're going to tell the reader something that differs with, or contradicts, or goes in another direction than that what came before. I supervised a reporter for many years who finally told me, Tom, I'm sorry, I'm just never going to get this. I can't. Well, here, the basic rule is if it's an extra thing you're adding on, it's which. If the sentence would not make any sense without that thing, it's that. Dangling modifiers. This is a writing mistake that's very easy to miss. The examples tell you what I'm talking about. The subject of an introductory clause needs to match the subject in the subsequent clause. So it's not, having taken Tom's class, writing has improved, but my writing has improved. Yay! Here's some odds and ends as we wrap through the style stuff. It's taken me a while to stop typing out the word percent. That was a semi-recent change in AP style. 1 through 9 are almost always spelled out. Exceptions would be for ages, dimensions, addresses, a few less common things. Watch out for the word includes. Includes means here's some of the things, but not all of them. I also learned that recently that Inc. Incorporated and LLC do not get those commas wrapped around them, which surprised me, so I've been doing that wrong for decades. And you should also know, I use search and replace to catch all those double spaces after periods that Mr. Henderson insisted on in junior high. Period, space, next sentence. Thank you. The New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and some other publications still capitalize their words in headlines, but most other professional publications have moved away from it. That's because research shows it's actually harder to read. As you can see yourself if you read that second bullet point here to yourself. It's almost as if There was a period between the words. Speed bumps. Note on typography. You know how Word has 80 jillion fonts and themes? Please do not experiment with them. This goes for drop shadows on photos, shaded backgrounds, and a lot of the horrible things that Excel suggests to do with spreadsheets. Consistency in how we present our documents, with sparse, professional, and graceful typography, is another important measure of quality. Using a variety of fonts can look unprofessional, or at worst, like a ransom note. Also, avoid using color just to highlight in most cases, but do use it to convey information. It's really helpful in just reminding people, oh, this is really that other thing that's this color. And when you do, note the City of Carlsbad has a very specific preferred color palette for city documents. If you're in doubt about that, just check with the city's Communication Engagement Department staff. The 5 tips you came for, we finally got here. Thank you. Before you start putting letters on a screen, conceive your narrative. Again, you're going to lay down a straight road with as few twists and turns as possible. I recommend an outline. Here are the building blocks of this document. Here's the logical order in which they should be presented. Where will the reader be looking for this information? You don't want to make them have to go back up to recall something that really fits better down lower. The last one of these is hugely important. What can you not say? Less is more effective than more a lot of times. Sometimes people want to put everything in a document and demonstrate their expertise, their comprehensiveness, their thoroughness. But that can end up forcing the reader to have to do a lot of extra work to get the message. And it could also send an additional message. This guy gets lost in the details or is unable to get to the point. You do not want to waste your reader's time, or even worse, irritate them, the city council, with unneeded material. The beginning and end of documents, paragraphs, and even sentences tend to have more resonance, they stick in the head more, than the middle parts. People remember the opening number and that last song, the first note and the last note of the symphony. Their minds can tend to wander in those middle parts. Okay, first go micro. Is every word needed? Again, different, in addition to, currently, furthermore. Is that word really needed to tell the story? Does it advance the ball down the field? Then again, is it the right word? Does it convey exactly what you want? Or are there other meanings or unwanted connotations? Then, do you really need that $10 word when a 2-bit word would suffice? And maybe even be faster and easier for the reader? Now go macro. Look at the building blocks, the concepts, the ideas. Are they in the right order? Do they build upon one another? Or putting it another way, are they all headed in the same direction? Or are there U-turns in the document? Does this part up here actually belong down there, where we're actually talking about that thing? Going back to my earlier slides, you want to build that nice road, not that road sign with all the squiggly arrows pointing all over. Then, finally, comes a last look at the presentation. Is it just one giant, scary-looking block of type after another? Are key points hidden in the middle of paragraphs or sentences? A short paragraph is fine, and there's actually no rule that says paragraphs cannot just be one sentence. That can be hugely effective in driving a point home. Are there parts that would be better broken out with bullets or numbers or a chart? And as you're doing this, you may very well notice passages that need better homes that could find better homes elsewhere in the document. One extra credit tip: if I've been editing a file a lot, I can miss things when I'm reading it over again. If you read it out loud, you will immediately spot clunky passages, missing words, typos, and other problems that you can gloss over when you're writing and editing and reading a document again and again and again. I know I do. Word even has a program that reads things aloud for you, though the voice is guaranteed to annoy your coworkers. Okay, now for the quiz. Although it's non-interactive in this setting, but maybe it'd still be fun. What style errors do you see in this? This has a few style errors, but how could you also make it more effective? The biggest problem is it's in reverse chronological order. They finish the project before they start it. This is that date rule again that can be hard to remember. Which one of these is right? Which company name looks correct to you? Again, this is that thing I got wrong for many, many years. So you're not alone, perhaps. What's messed up with this sentence? How could you make it clearer? Well, aside from the style things, the biggest problem is it doesn't say what Proposition H is. How do you make this easier to read? Less is more in this case. This example was cribbed from a staff report, but as you can see from the rewritten example, fewer words says the same information much faster. Please let me know if I can help you in individual coaching sessions, help you improve your writing that way. I love working with people to make their writing better and stronger and help tell the city's story. And indeed, that's part of my job. Thanks again for your time.